Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez recently committed the most severe blunder of her congressional career. She directly insulted Senator John Kennedy on live broadcast, labeling him a joke to his face. As she dismissed him as a walking punchline, a late-night comic wielding a gavel with 3 decades of government service yielding nothing but one-liners, she overlooked one critical detail. John Kennedy graduated from Oxford University with first-class honors. For 16 years, he flawlessly managed $20 billion in pension funds without losing a single cent. He has essentially spent his entire senatorial career anticipating the moment someone young and arrogant enough would confuse his quiet demeanor with stupidity. AOC was oblivious. She genuinely believed she had just humiliated him. Looking at the elderly man in his reading glasses, scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad, she assumed absolute victory. Her team was likely already drafting a post about how AOC destroyed Kennedy on the Senate floor. The clip was destined to go viral by lunchtime. It certainly did, but hardly in the manner she anticipated. Kennedy calmly set his pen down, removed his reading glasses, and deliberately wiped them with his necktie. He moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who possesses all the time in the world and fully intends to utilize every passing second. He gazed at AOC wearing the expression of a grandfather listening to his granddaughter dictate how to operate the family farm after merely spending a single summer harvesting tomatoes. "Well," he remarked, his signature Louisiana drawl completely unchanged from the dialect of his ancestors. "That was entertaining. It reminded me of my neighbor Boudreaux's daughter, who arrives at Thanksgiving every year brimming with grandiose plans for running the ranch. She's never actually fed a chicken, mind you, but she certainly has plans." He flipped to a fresh page on his legal pad. "Now, Representative, you claimed I'm a comedian, that I possess no substance. Let's test that theory, because I have some inquiries regarding your substance, and I suspect it might be significantly thinner than your rhetoric." He peered at her over his spectacles. "Let's begin with math, because math is precisely where political slogans go to die. Smash that like button because you are about to witness a 73-year-old country lawyer from Louisiana who happens to hold more academic degrees than AOC has passed bills methodically dismantle the most famous progressive brand in America. He accomplished this utilizing nothing but a yellow legal pad, a slow southern drawl, and the kind of surgical patience forged through 18 years of cross-examining individuals who mistakenly believed they were the smartest people in the room. The Senate Budget Committee hearing had been completely routine for exactly 2 hours and 13 minutes before Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez transformed it into a career-altering catastrophe. The official subject, long-term fiscal sustainability and investment priorities, was a dry procedural topic that typically attracted minimal public interest. C-SPAN was broadcasting it live to its usual demographic of political junkies and insomniacs. CNN had a camera stationed in the room, but wasn't airing it live. The gallery was only half full. AOC had been invited by the committee's Democratic contingent to present her Green New Deal 2.0 framework, an updated iteration of the sweeping climate and economic legislation she debuted in 2019. Her presence was a calculated move to inject vitality into a forgettable Tuesday morning. It succeeded. The instant AOC was announced as a witness, the gallery packed tightly. CNN immediately switched to live coverage. Social media platforms lit up with anticipation. Senator John Kennedy sat in his usual spot on the Republican side of the dais, sporting a patterned tie and reading glasses perched on his nose with a yellow legal pad open before him. He tapped his pen against the paper in a rhythm only he understood. He had been quietly jotting notes during previous testimonies with the unhurried focus of a craftsman treating wood, showing respect for the material and immense patience for the process. AOC's opening statement spanned 10 minutes and was, by any metric, a virtuoso performance. She spoke entirely without notes. She maintained direct eye contact with individual senators. She recited climate data from memory, vividly illustrating flooded avenues in Queens, blistering heat waves in Phoenix, and severe droughts in California. She seamlessly tied each environmental crisis to specific proposals within her framework. She was passionate, specific, and highly compelling. The committee listened respectfully. Democrats nodded in agreement while Republicans took notes. Then, at the 8-minute mark, AOC made the fateful decision that would redefine the hearing and permanently alter her political trajectory. She pivoted away from addressing the committee at large to single out one specific senator. "And I want to speak directly to Senator Kennedy," she declared, pointing squarely at him from the witness table. "Because I know exactly what's coming. I know he's sitting there right now, brainstorming some clever little country saying, some folksy zinger perfectly crafted to play on Fox News tonight." Kennedy glanced up from his legal pad with only mild interest, reacting the way someone does when they hear their name mentioned across a restaurant. "Senator, with all due respect, you are the fundamental reason this institution is broken," she continued. "You've been in government for 30 years, 3 decades. And what exactly is your legacy? A collection of one-liners, a greatest hits album of media sound bites. You're not a legislator, Senator. You're a late-night comedian with a gavel." She turned her attention back to the entire room, her voice elevating with the rehearsed crescendo of someone who had practiced this monologue internally 100 times. "While the planet burns, while families cannot afford their insulin, while children go to bed hungry, this man sits in the most powerful legislative body on earth and crafts jokes. The American people don't need his Saturday Night Live routines. They demand substance. They demand policy. They require leaders who take our future seriously instead of treating the Senate like an open mic night." She glared back at Kennedy. "Your time-cracking jokes while Rome burns is over, Senator? The next generation has arrived. And we are not laughing." She concluded her statement with the definitive force of a period at the end of a sentence. A ripple of applause erupted from progressive organizers in the gallery. One Democratic staffer whispered something to a colleague, producing a highly satisfied grin. Within 90 seconds, the hashtag #AOCEndsKennedy began trending online. Kennedy did not react to any of this. He remained seated exactly as before, glasses on, legal pad open, pen in hand. If anything, his expression had softened slightly during her verbal assault, resembling someone whose long-held suspicions had just been perfectly confirmed. When the applause finally subsided, Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham looked down the dais. "Senator Kennedy, you have been referenced directly. Would you care to respond during your allotted questioning time?" Kennedy took a slow, deliberate sip of water, placed the glass down, removed his reading spectacles, and wiped them with his tie. He took roughly 6 seconds to complete a task that typically requires 2. John Kennedy intimately understood that weaponized silence following an attack is exponentially more devastating than a rushed rebuttal. He returned the glasses to his face, glanced at his legal pad, looked at AOC, and smiled. Not broadly, not smugly, but the subtle, private smile of a man who had just been handed precisely what he wanted. "Mr. Chairman, I surely would." He shifted his focus to AOC. "Representative. That was incredibly entertaining. I mean that with all sincerity. You possess real talent. Your delivery is top tier. It reminds me of my neighbor Boudreaux's daughter. She visits for Thanksgiving every single year with grandiose plans for how we ought to manage the family ranch. Now, she's never actually fed a chicken, never mucked out a stall, never balanced the financial ledgers on a livestock operation, but Lord, she certainly has plans. Even brought a color-coded binder." A quiet chuckle cascaded across the Republican side of the dais. Even one Democratic senator let a small smile escape before quickly suppressing it. "Now, Representative, you just spent 2 minutes branding me a comedian. You claimed I lack substance, that I am nothing but jokes and devoid of policy. I'd like to put that theory to the test. I've been diligently taking notes during your presentation, and I have several questions regarding your substance." He flipped his legal pad to a page heavily covered in small, precise handwriting prepared in advance. "I have 5 distinct lessons I wish to walk through with you, not as insults, but as educational lessons. You demanded substance, and I am going to provide you with more substance in the next 20 minutes than you have accumulated in your 6 years in Congress." He pressed his finger against the first bullet point. "Lesson 1. How math works. Representative, you just spent 10 minutes pitching the Green New Deal 2.0 to this committee. You labeled it an investment rather than a cost. You declared it a framework for the future, insisting that anyone opposing it is prioritizing profits over the planet." Kennedy stared at her over his frames. "All right, let's discuss it. Let's skip the rhetoric and look at the math. I managed $20 billion of other people's money for 16 years as Louisiana's state treasurer. And I learned quickly that the primary difference between a brilliant idea and a bankrupt idea is a calculator. Exactly how much does the Green New Deal cost? AOC leaned into her microphone defensively. Senator, the Green New Deal is a comprehensive framework, not a singular piece of legislation. The total cost depends heavily on implementation specifics that... Representative, I didn't ask for a framework, Kennedy interrupted smoothly. I asked for a concrete number. Your own office published a cost analysis. Your own surrogates have cited this figure. What is the number? AOC shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Various independent analyses have estimated it at $93 trillion. Kennedy repeated it with the clinical detachment of a physician delivering a diagnosis. $93 trillion over 10 years. That isn't my figure, Representative. That isn't Fox News' figure. That is the number derived directly from the policy proposals outlined in your own resolution. He picked up his pen and began calculating on his pad in real time for the cameras. $93 trillion divided by 330 million Americans. That equates to roughly $281,000 per individual. For a standard family of 4, that is $1.1 million. He looked up directly at her. The median household income in this nation is approximately $75,000 annually. You are effectively asking the average American family to shoulder a financial burden that is 14 times their yearly income. He set the pen down. Now, Representative, I managed a pension fund. Teachers, firefighters, nurses, police officers, real money belonging to real hard-working people counting on those funds to survive at age 70. If I had walked into a board meeting and announced, I have a phenomenal investment, it will only cost 14 times your annual salary, I cannot explain exactly how it will be funded, and the official FAQ mentions providing economic security for those unwilling to work. They would have terminated me. He paused. Not the following week, not after a performance review. They would have escorted me out of the building before lunch. AOC quickly interjected. Senator, economists estimate that the financial cost of inaction on climate change will be far greater. That is a fantastic bumper sticker, Representative. But bumper stickers do not balance federal budgets, Kennedy replied. His tone lacked any hostility. Instead, it carried the patient warmth of a professor explaining compound interest to a freshman. When I asked you for a hard number, you provided a framework. When I fed you the number, your own number, you offered me a slogan. That is not substance, Representative. Down in Louisiana, we call that all hat, no cattle. He glanced back at his legal pad. There's a fellow back home named Boudreaux, the father of the girl with the ranch plans. Boudreaux once approached me when I was treasurer, pitching a catfish farm. It was a beautiful proposal. Glossy paper, high-resolution photographs, charts pointing up and to the right. I said, Boudreaux, I appreciate the vision. How much will it cost? He replied, John, it's not about the cost. It's about the massive opportunity. I told him, Boudreaux, I cannot eat opportunity. How much? He never provided an answer. The catfish farm was never constructed, and Boudreaux still owes me for the coffee I bought him during that meeting. Kennedy leveled his gaze at AOC. Your Green New Deal is Boudreaux's catfish farm, Representative, a beautiful vision wrapped in a color-coded binder. But the moment someone inquires about the math, you instantly change the subject to the weather. AOC's jaw tightened visibly. Her right hand gripped the edge of the witness table. It was a microscopic movement, but the C-SPAN camera, which had been slowly zooming in on her face for 2 minutes, captured the tension in high definition. Lesson 1. Representative. Substance begins with math, not political slogans, Kennedy summarized. And $93 trillion divided by 330 million people is a calculation you should have been able to recite in your sleep before ever walking into this room. He flipped to the next page. Lesson 2. How money works. Specifically, your money. Kennedy retrieved a document from a folder resting next to his legal pad. It wasn't a classified dossier or a theatrical prop. It was simply a printed summary stamped with the official seal of the House Ethics Committee. September 13th, 2021. The Met Gala. You attended wearing a stunning white dress designed by Aurora James, with the phrase, "Tax the Rich," boldly written across the back. The ticket price for this exclusive event was $35,000 per person. He looked up. Now, I certainly appreciate the irony. Wearing Tax the Rich to a gathering that costs more than most Americans earn in 6 months. That is either incredibly clever or incredibly something else. But let's bypass the symbolism and dive into the substance. In July 2025, the House Ethics Committee published its findings regarding your Met Gala attendance. They concluded that you directly violated the House gift rule. You accepted impermissible gifts associated with the event, including the ticket itself, the dress, accessories, and professional hair and makeup services. You were formally ordered to pay approximately $2,733 in restitution, alongside a $250 late payment penalty. He held up the report. But the violation itself isn't the most intriguing part, Representative. The fascinating aspect is how you managed the paperwork. He read directly from the document. To secure free admission for your fiancée, Riley Roberts, you designated him as your spouse on the event's official documentation. That specific designation triggered a loophole in the gift rule, allowing spouses of congressional members to attend without the gifts counting against the members' official limits. He lowered the report. However, and this is where it becomes exceptionally educational, on your official financial disclosure filings, which are mandated by House rules and federal law, you deliberately did not list Riley Roberts as your spouse. Because officially listing someone as a spouse on those federal forms requires full disclosure of their financial assets, income streams, and liabilities. He stared at her with the mild, inquisitive expression of an auditor who had just uncovered an anomaly in a tax return. Spouse when you desperately needed free entry to a $35,000 gala. Not a spouse when it required revealing to the American public exactly where his money comes from. He paused. Representative, I am not a highly complicated man, but even I can clearly see the geometry of that specific arrangement, and the Ethics Committee saw it as well. OC's physical composure held, but the immense effort was showing. It was the micro-tension around the eyes and jawline that professional debate coaches desperately train their clients to suppress, and that camera operators actively hunt for. Kennedy pushed forward without awaiting a rebuttal. But the Met Gala is hardly the only financial irregularity in your political record. Representative, let's discuss your former chief of staff. He flipped another page. Saikat Chakrabarti, your very first and most influential chief of staff. In 2019, the National Legal and Policy Center filed a formal complaint alleging that Chakrabarti funneled over $1 million from a political action committee he managed through entities explicitly described as shell companies, corporate entities that Chakrabarti also controlled. The central allegation was that these massive transfers were intentionally structured to bypass federal campaign finance disclosure laws. Chakrabarti mysteriously departed your office shortly after this complaint was officially filed. No formal charges were brought against you personally, Representative. But when your chief of staff funnels $1 million through shell corporations and promptly vanishes from your office, in my 30 years of legal practice, I've learned that such a pattern typically signifies something. It very rarely means everything is perfectly fine. He produced yet another document. More recently, in 2025, that same organization filed an additional complaint regarding roughly $20,000 in campaign expenditures explicitly paid to Dr. Brian Boyle, a licensed psychiatrist. Your campaign documented these massive payments under the guise of leadership training and counseling. The complainant accurately noted that Dr. Boyle's professional website absolutely does not list leadership training or political counseling among his medical services. His publicly advertised specialties include, among other clinical practices, ketamine-assisted therapy. I am not going to speculate on the nature of those sessions, Representative. That is entirely your private medical business. However, campaign funds are public money, generously donated by citizens for strict political purposes. And when public funds are diverted to a psychiatrist for services he doesn't actually offer, the voters are entirely entitled to ask exactly what they are paying for. He neatly stacked the documents and folded his hands. Representative, you marched into this hearing wearing Tax the Rich as your personal brand. Yet your own financial history reveals verified ethics violations at a billionaire's masquerade ball, a former chief of staff who laundered $1 million through shell companies and $20,000 in donor funds funneled to a doctor for unadvertised services. You confidently told me I was all jokes and no substance. Here is a hefty dose of substance for you. Every single fact I just cited is thoroughly documented, entirely public, and independently verified. The Ethics Committee report bears your name. The FEC complaint bears your Chief of Staff's name. The campaign disbursement filings proudly bear Dr. Boyle's name. That isn't comedy, Representative. That is a forensic audit. It appears the woman demanding we tax the wealthy cannot even properly manage her own campaign's checkbook. He casually turned to the next page. Lesson 3. How hypocrisy works. Because this particular lesson is my absolute favorite. Representative, I am going to do something highly unusual for a senator who was just labeled a comedian. I am going to pay you a genuine compliment. AOC stared back with the profound weariness of someone who had realized over the past 15 minutes that Kennedy's Southern courtesy was the actual blade, not the handle. You have successfully engineered one of the most brilliant political brands in modern American history, Kennedy praised. 36 million followers on Instagram, glossy magazine covers, lucrative documentary deals. You effectively transformed a bartender from the Bronx into a lucrative global identity. That requires immense talent. I mean that with utter sincerity. Marketing conglomerates actively study your operation. He paused, letting the compliment hang. But here is the fundamental truth about brands, Representative. A brand is fundamentally a promise. And when the promise completely fails to match the actual product, people eventually notice. They might not notice immediately. They might not notice this year, but eventually the chasm between what you loudly preach and what you actively do becomes so incredibly vast that even your most devoted fans can see daylight shining right through it. He opened a fresh section of his yellow pad. You explicitly instructed American schoolchildren, on camera and in an official capacity, to sacrifice meat and dairy for a meal as a personal climate action. Yet, during that exact same period, your campaign blew approximately $50,000 at luxury hotels, high-end fine dining establishments, and premium entertainment venues in Puerto Rico. According to your own FEC filings, this included a venue directly associated with a Bad Bunny concert. Skip meat and dairy? Unless you happen to be in Puerto Rico spending donor cash, then it's luxury resort dining all the way. He barreled on before she could formulate a defense. You passionately championed public transit as the ultimate green alternative to personal vehicles. Yet your own campaign's massive transportation expenditures reveal an extensive, almost exclusive reliance on Uber and Lyft ride-sharing services, including for short trips where public transit was literally available within walking distance of your starting point. Take the subway. Unless it's you, then request an Uber. You fiercely advocated for drastically reducing air travel in favor of rail networks. Your own documented travel records include numerous flights on routes where Amtrak service was readily available and, in some cases, highly competitive on time. Take the train, unless it's you, then book a flight. And then we arrive at the infamous Vanity Fair cover shoot, $14,000 worth of designer clothing for a single afternoon photo session. For proper context, Representative, $14,000 is roughly what a hardworking home health aide in your own district earns in 4 exhaustive months. The woman who claims to represent the most impoverished neighborhoods in New York City posed for an elite fashion magazine draped in an outfit that would require her average constituent a third of a year to afford. Kennedy slowly removed his glasses and placed them flat on his desk. It was the specific gesture he utilized when he intended to speak without a single barrier between himself and his target. Now, I am not a socialist, Representative. I firmly believe individuals should be free to spend their money however they see fit. You earned that opportunity. You are entitled to enjoy nice things. But when you construct your entire political identity on being the fierce champion of struggling working families, and then you casually live the lavish lifestyle that those exact families deeply resent, that isn't progressive politics. Down south, my mama would have called that preaching water and drinking wine. He slid his glasses back on. You aggressively asked why I make jokes, Representative. Let me tell you exactly why. Because sometimes the massive gap between what a person loudly proclaims and what they actually do is so astronomically wide that a joke is the only intellectually honest response available. A politician wearing tax the rich at a $35,000 elite party is a walking joke. Not because she is unintelligent, you are clearly brilliant, but because the sheer contradiction is so enormous that laughter is the only sane human reaction. That is exactly why there are detailed instructions printed on the back of shampoo bottles, Representative. Not because the general public can't figure out how to wash their hair, but because certain folks are so incredibly busy lecturing everyone else on how to bathe that they completely forget to check if they are holding their own bottle upside down. AOC defensively uncrossed her arms, crossed them again, and shifted heavily in her chair. Her body language was a glaring semaphore of extreme discomfort that 20 million C-SPAN viewers were decoding in real time. Kennedy turned yet another page with the terrifying calm of a man operating perfectly on schedule. Lesson 4. How government actually functions. Because this is precisely where it gets deeply personal for me, since you explicitly attacked my public record. Representative, you labeled me a man with 30 years in government with absolutely nothing to show for it. I intend to address that directly because, unlike your other baseless accusations, I take this one personally. He set his pen down completely and spoke entirely from memory. In 16 years serving as Louisiana State Treasurer, I managed the state's massive pension fund for dedicated public employees. $20 billion. Teachers, heroic firefighters, overworked nurses, police officers, and state laborers, people who sacrificed their careers serving Louisiana and were desperately counting on that fund to feed them in retirement. Throughout my entire tenure, our fund's returns consistently met or wildly exceeded financial benchmarks. We enacted strict reforms that slashed management fees and drastically increased transparency. When I finally left office, that fund was significantly stronger than the day I inherited it. That is not glamorous work, Representative. It doesn't generate Instagram likes. Nobody commissions a Vanity Fair cover regarding pension fund fiscal management. But every single retired teacher in Louisiana who securely cashes a pension check today is cashing a check that I personally helped protect. During my 8 years in the United States Senate, I've drafted banking reform, agricultural policy, and massive disaster relief for Louisiana. We endure a lot of hurricanes down there, as you might have heard. I've handled complex judicial confirmations and meticulous oversight of federal spending. Once again, it's not glamorous. It doesn't go viral, but it is incredibly real. He opened his legal pad to a page neatly divided into 2 columns. Now, let us examine your legislative record, Representative. 6 highly publicized years in Congress. He dragged his index finger down the left column. Total bills formally sponsored by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that were successfully signed into law as standalone legislation. 0. He allowed the absolute 0 to hang in the air for 3 suffocating seconds. Now, to be entirely fair, that specific number demands proper context. Passing standalone legislation is incredibly difficult, especially when operating in the minority. Most congressional members don't pass many. However, you were proudly in the majority during the 117th Congress, when Democrats enjoyed total control of the House, the Senate, and the White House. That was your ultimate legislative window. Every conceivable advantage was heavily in your favor. During that golden window, your signature legislation, the Green New Deal, was formally put to a vote in the Senate. Not a single solitary senator voted for it. Not one. Not even the progressive senators who publicly showered you with praise for your vision and courage. When it came time to actually attach their names to the bill, they cowardly voted present. They wouldn't even commit to voting no. They simply declined to participate in the charade. Your highly touted Just Society suite of bills, ambitious and comprehensive, I will grant you that, did not pass. Your aggressive credit card interest rate cap, co-authored with Senator Sanders, did not pass. Your Public Banking Act did not pass. He shifted his gaze to the right column. Co-sponsored legislation that eventually became law. 14 bills during your freshman term. Adopted amendments, a small handful, including a highly commendable one redirecting $5 million from the DEA directly to opioid addiction treatment. I give you profound credit for that. Real, earned credit. But Representative, merely co-sponsoring a popular bill is essentially like squeezing into the group photograph. The real question is whether you were actually in the kitchen doing the heavy cooking, or if you simply showed up right in time for dessert. He firmly closed the legal pad on that specific section. You possess 36 million Instagram followers. representative, and exactly 0 federal laws bearing your name. I possess roughly 400,000 followers on the social media platforms my younger staff forces me to use, coupled with 30 years of grueling public service where the financial numbers always added up and the retirement checks always cleared. He locked eyes with her. You called me a comedian wielding a gavel. You claimed my only legacy consists of one-liners, but here is the stark difference between us. When my career concludes, retired school teachers down in Louisiana will continue cashing pension checks that I safeguarded. When your career concludes, your followers will have digital screenshots. Between the two of us, representative, and I ask this with genuine, sincere curiosity, not hostility, who exactly is the walking punchline? AOC opened her mouth. 3 distinct sentences were birthed and instantly died within the span of 4 excruciating seconds. Senator, you're deliberately... Stop. My established record on progressive amendments and constituent advocacy... Stop. The complex legislative process doesn't exclusively measure impact through... Stop. Every single sentence structurally collapsed because Kennedy hadn't attacked her progressive ideology. If he had called democratic socialism evil, she possessed a rehearsed speech for that. If he had denied the reality of climate change, she possessed a viral monologue for that. But he hadn't done either. He had clinically attacked her core effectiveness, the staggering distance between her towering ambition and her non-existent results. She was discovering in real time that she had no prepared teleprompter response for the simple, undeniable observation that 6 years of being the absolute loudest voice in Congress had generated the quietest legislative record in the building. Kennedy observed her frantic search for words with an expression that wasn't quite sympathy, yet wasn't quite satisfaction. It was the authentic expression of a veteran teacher who had asked a fair question and was genuinely curious to see if the student had bothered to do the required reading. She clearly hadn't. Take all the time you need, Representative, Kennedy offered quietly. Lesson 5 is the final one, and I believe it is the most crucial. Kennedy's vocal tone shifted. Not dramatically, and not toward anger or softness. It transitioned to something deeply personal. It was the authentic voice of a man preparing to say something he truly meant, rather than something he had merely calculated. Representative, I want to discuss your personal origin story, not your policy proposals. Your story. Because your personal narrative sits at the very heart of the empire you've built, and I firmly believe the American electorate deserves to hear it recounted accurately. You've aggressively sold America the narrative that you are simply a scrappy bartender from the Bronx. That specific story, a working-class girl pouring drinks, challenging the political establishment, and miraculously winning, is genuinely incredibly compelling. It embodies the absolute pinnacle of the American dream. It is the exact kind of narrative this great nation was founded upon. However, it is not quite the entire truth. He spoke entirely without consulting his notes for the very first time during the hearing. You were indeed born in the Bronx. That much is factual, but when you were approximately 5 years old, your family relocated to Yorktown Heights in Westchester County. Now, for individuals who aren't native to New York, and I am certainly one of them, being a Louisiana boy, Westchester County happens to be one of the wealthiest, most affluent counties in the entire state. The median household income there is roughly double the national average. The real estate in Yorktown Heights averages well over $500,000. Your father was a successful architect, Representative. That is a highly respected professional career, a lucrative career that firmly positioned your family solidly within the middle class. The authentic middle class, not the fabricated political talking point. You attended Yorktown Central High School, an exceptionally well-funded public institution in a wealthy suburb where you actively participated in prestigious science competitions and secured academic awards. You subsequently attended Boston University, where the annual tuition currently runs approximately $40,000 per year. Following college, you did indeed bartend and wait tables. That is real, honest, grueling work. I hold immense respect for anyone who serves tables for a living. I have stated that publicly, and I mean it to my core. But the bartending phase was merely a brief chapter, Representative. It was not the entire book. He looked directly at her. There is absolutely nothing wrong with your actual background. Not a single thing. Growing up comfortably middle class in an excellent suburb, raised by a father with a successful professional career, is something to be immensely proud of. Millions of struggling Americans would have desperately loved to provide their children with that exact childhood. But that is not the story you aggressively market. You market the Bronx. You market the bartending. You market the desperate struggle. Because middle-class girl raised in affluent Westchester County simply does not fit the revolutionary brand. He leaned back slightly in his leather chair. Now, here is precisely where I differ from some of my political colleagues, Representative. I am not going to weaponize your background against you. Instead, I am going to share mine with you. I am proudly from Zachary, Louisiana. Population: roughly 17,000. My beloved mama was a public school teacher. My daddy worked incredibly hard. We certainly weren't rich, but we were never hungry. I enjoyed a wonderful, stable childhood. I attended excellent academic institutions, Vanderbilt, UVA, and Oxford. Because I studied relentlessly, caught a few lucky breaks, and was blessed with mentors who genuinely believed in my potential. And here is the critical difference between us. I do not pretend for 1 second that any of those advantages didn't happen. I absolutely refuse to construct a political brand based on a heavily edited version of my life designed to make me sound significantly more working class than I actually was. When folks ask where I hail from, I proudly declare Zachary, Louisiana. And I immediately tell them, my mama was a teacher and my daddy worked hard. I do not cynically reinvent my childhood to accommodate a political narrative. You aggressively told America you are strictly from the Bronx. The reality is you were raised in Westchester. You told America you are gritty working class. Your father was an architect. You told America you intimately understand financial struggle. You attended a $40,000 a year elite university. And then, immediately after monetizing that specific brand of poverty, you eagerly attended $35,000 billionaire galas. You happily wore $14,000 designer outfits for photo shoots. You casually blew $50,000 of donor contributions at luxury Caribbean resorts. And you simultaneously lectured struggling working families to skip meat and dairy to save the planet. His voice dropped to that dangerous quiet register his veteran audiences knew carried the most devastating weight. Representative, that is not mere hypocrisy. Standard hypocrisy is simply doing the exact opposite of what you genuinely believe. This is something far more insidious. This is doing the exact opposite of what you falsely pretend to believe. And it is the pretending, the heavily manufactured origin story, the highly curated struggle, the lucrative brand of poverty that wildly contradicts the affluent Westchester childhood, and the lavish Met Gala lifestyle. That is the part that deeply bothers the American people, not because they are petty or jealous of your immense success, but because they implicitly trusted the story you sold them. And the story was not entirely true. Kennedy calmly closed his yellow legal pad, set his pen precisely on top of it with a satisfying click, removed his reading glasses, polished them one final time, and tucked them neatly into his breast pocket. The deliberate sequence of physical movement served as the visual equivalent of a closing argument's final, devastating paragraph. Representative, you confidently initiated this hearing by branding me a comedian, a walking punchline, and a relic with 30 years in government boasting nothing but empty one-liners. Over the past 20 minutes, I have formally asked you to defend the basic mathematics underlying your signature bill, and you fundamentally couldn't. I have fully documented severe ethics violations that the House Ethics Committee officially flagged and penalized you for. I have systematically cataloged an elite lifestyle that aggressively contradicts the lucrative brand you've constructed on being a working-class champion. I have directly compared your non-existent legislative record of 0 standalone bills to my 3 decades of flawlessly managing real capital and passing impactful legislation. And I have publicly recited the full, unedited version of the origin story you have been carefully doctoring for 6 years. That is real substance, Representative. It simply isn't the specific type of substance you are accustomed to dealing with. Because the substance you are used to, highly edited Instagram reels, flashy Met Gala dresses, glossy Vanity Fair covers, and viral TikTok clips, simply cannot survive direct contact with a yellow legal pad and a man who has been crunching complex mathematics since long before you were even born. He folded his hands together. Now, Representative, I am an old man, 73 years of age. I have been around this earth long enough to understand that maliciously tearing someone down without offering a constructive path forward is merely meanness dressed up in a tailored suit. Therefore, I am going to offer you something I very rarely provide to witnesses at congressional committee hearings. I am going to assign you homework. The massive room went completely still. The word homework, directed from a 73-year-old veteran senator to a 36-year-old media darling congresswoman, carried a highly specific, undeniable charge. It instantly established the dynamic of an authoritative teacher disciplining a student who had consistently been submitting woefully incomplete work. Not a committee assignment, Representative. Lord knows you've struggled enough with those. A literal homework assignment. Go home this coming weekend. Do not attend the Met Gala. Do not fly to luxury resorts in Puerto Rico. Do not schedule another Vanity Fair photo shoot. Go to the Bronx. The actual, gritty Bronx. The Bronx you continuously campaign on but didn't actually grow up in. Knock on real doors. Sit down at actual kitchen tables. Look families making $40,000 a year straight in the eye, and without a camera crew, without a teleprompter, and without flattering Instagram filters, explain to them exactly how your $93 trillion economic plan is going to rescue them. Utilize hard numbers, not empty slogans. Physically explain how the math functions, show them the actual calculator, and once you've done that, explain to them precisely why you burned $50,000 of donor cash at a luxury resort while they were agonizing over whether to buy groceries or pay the electric bill. Then, politely explain why your single dress cost more than their primary vehicle. If you can successfully accomplish that, Representative, if you can sit in those cramped kitchens and honestly defend your voting record to the desperate people who actually live the brutal life you claim to represent, then perhaps you truly are the fearless working-class champion you insist you are. He paused for maximum effect. If you cannot, well, at the very least, you will finally understand exactly why the shampoo bottle requires printed directions. Chairman Lindsey Graham turned his gaze toward AOC. Representative, would you care to respond? The entire hearing room held its breath. AOC leaned anxiously toward her microphone. She attempted to speak, but the words that escaped were not the rapid-fire, camera-ready, heavily rehearsed rhetoric that had catapulted her to superstardom. It was something entirely halting, desperately searching, and embarrassingly unfinished. Senator, I truly believe what you have attempted here today is highly reductive, and it fundamentally fails to capture the... She abruptly stopped. The sentence was careening off a cliff, refusing to go where she needed it to go. The Green New Deal essentially represents a deep moral framework that... She stopped once again. Kennedy had just spent 10 grueling minutes systematically dismantling the word framework as a pathetic substitute for basic mathematics. Attempting to deploy it again would only instantly validate his entire thesis. My extensive record of fierce advocacy and dedicated constituent service... She stopped a third time. Every single rhetorical path out of the devastating conversation required navigating straight through a steel trap Kennedy had already meticulously set and locked. 8 agonizing seconds of dead silence. Over 6 years of dominating the most active social media presence in congressional history, through hundreds of intense committee hearings, thousands of aggressive media interviews, raucous press conferences, town halls, and countless Instagram live streams, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had never once been rendered completely silent for 8 consecutive seconds on camera. Kennedy observed her panicked silence with immense patience. It wasn't triumphant, nor was it cruel. It was the grounded patience of a veteran litigator who had posed a brutally fair question and was perfectly willing to wait for an honest answer, even if that honest answer manifested entirely as humiliated silence. There is absolutely no rush, Representative, Kennedy stated quietly. Whenever you finally calculate the answer, you know exactly where to find me. I will be down in Louisiana, likely enjoying a bowl of gumbo. Certainly not at a luxury resort. He slowly stood up, carefully gathering his yellow legal pad, his favorite pen, and his ethics folder. He buttoned his suit jacket with the unhurried, satisfied care of a blue-collar worker who had successfully finished a hard day's labor. "I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman. I happily yield back the remainder of my allotted time," which, completely unlike the Green New Deal, I managed not to irresponsibly waste. He strode out of the room. The devastating video clip packages began aggressively circulating online before Kennedy even reached the Capitol hallway. It wasn't just a single clip. There were 6 distinct packages, each carrying a completely different payload, targeting a wildly different demographic audience. Yet all of them converged rapidly on the exact same undeniable conclusion. The most famous, untouchable progressive brand in America had just been subjected to a brutal forensic audit by a country lawyer wielding nothing but a yellow legal pad. And the final numbers simply didn't add up. The very first clip to break containment and go nuclear was Boudreaux's catfish farm. Kennedy's folksy, devastating analogy comparing the massive Green New Deal to his neighbor's delusional, unfunded business venture struck gold. The clip was roughly 90 seconds long and was shared an astonishing 40 million times within the first 24 hours alone. Prominent comedy writers immediately dubbed it the most rhetorically destructive moment to hit a policy proposal since "Read my lips, no new taxes." The analogy's immense viral power lay entirely in its absolute simplicity. It brilliantly reduced an incomprehensible $93 trillion federal proposal into a relatable, absurd conversation between 2 neighbors sipping coffee. In that brilliant reduction, it completely exposed the glaring absence of basic financial planning that AOC had successfully hidden beneath layers of ambitious, world-saving rhetoric. The second viral clip was "Spouse When Free, Not Spouse When Filing," featuring Kennedy's methodical, agonizing walkthrough of the Riley Roberts Met Gala designation discrepancy. This specific clip traveled along a completely different vector. It bypassed the comedy and meme channels, surging instead through elite financial, political, and legal communities. The highly specific ethics violation deeply resonated with compliance professionals who immediately understood exactly what the shady arrangement implied. The third clip focused entirely on the math. $281,000 per individual, 14 times the median American income. These staggering figures, delivered in Kennedy's unhurried, professorial drawl, instantly became the definitive conservative rebuttal to the entire progressive climate agenda. Not because the numbers were brand new, various critics had cited similar catastrophic figures for years, but because they were finally delivered person to person, in crystal clear plain language, by a credible man who had actually managed billions in real money at scale. The abstract numbers were finally attached to a human face, a trustworthy voice, and a relatable story about protecting a pension fund. That emotional attachment made the math stick in the public consciousness in ways that dry policy papers never historically had. The fourth massive clip was Zero Bill's 36 million followers. This brutal comparison evolved into a mainstream meme template within hours. The internet rapidly applied it to vapid influencers, underperforming corporate executives, and essentially anyone whose massive public profile completely eclipsed their measurable, real-world output. The phrase instantly entered the modern political lexicon as the ultimate shorthand for exposing the massive gap between hypervisibility and actual effectiveness. The fifth clip was the shampoo bottle. Kennedy's brilliant callback to his own legendary one-liner, repurposed not as a casual throwaway joke, but as the devastating capstone of a 20-minute evidence-based argument, proved that the quote had never been a mere attempt at comedy. It had always been a precise, calculated clinical diagnosis. And the final, most destructive sixth clip was the homework assignment. The full, uninterrupted sequence of Kennedy delivering specific, concrete, highly actionable instructions for AOC to travel to her own gritty district and manually explain her contradictory record to actual struggling families. This was immediately followed by the 8 agonizing seconds of complete silence from a woman who had never shut her mouth for 8 seconds in her entire adult life. That specific clip was shared more times than the other 5 combined. Not because it was the funniest or the sharpest intellectually, but because it was undeniably the most human. A veteran teacher assigning a cocky student homework, a student publicly realizing she hadn't done the required reading. Those 8 seconds of dead air communicated more about the massive chasm between a manufactured brand and stark reality than any investigative op-ed ever could. The immediate political fallout was incredibly substantial. AOC's vaunted small-dollar fundraising apparatus, the absolute undisputed engine of her entire political operation, experienced its very first significant, measurable decline in 6 years. Dedicated grassroots donors who had faithfully auto-contributed $20 or $30 every single month temporarily paused their recurring contributions to emotionally process what they had just witnessed on C-SPAN. The financial decline was not apocalyptic, but it was historically unprecedented. Her fundraising operation had never moved in any direction except straight up. The sudden reversal, however modest in scale, signaled a terrifying new reality: profound voter doubt. The Met Gala ethics findings, which the mainstream media had largely treated as a minor, forgettable hiccup when originally released, aggressively re-entered the primary news cycle with explosive renewed force. The blatant spouse versus non-spouse financial discrepancy evolved into a massive, standalone investigative story on major networks that had previously ignored it completely. AOC's panicked communications team hastily released a boilerplate statement condemning the hearing as a deeply partisan, sexist attack cleverly disguised beneath folksy Southern charm. However, political analysts immediately noted that the statement completely failed to address a single one of Kennedy's highly specific, documented factual claims. That glaring omission was widely interpreted by commentators as its own devastating form of confirmation. Kennedy, characteristically, granted absolutely no post-hearing media interviews. He released no triumphant press statements. He posted absolutely nothing to his social media feeds. When a frantic Fox News reporter finally cornered him in a Capitol hallway 2 days later, asking how he felt about breaking the internet with the viral response, Kennedy paused, carefully considered the inquiry, and replied, "I feel exactly like a young man who diligently completed his homework. It's a mighty good feeling. I highly recommend it." Deep in the Bronx, the gritty, authentic Bronx, not the affluent brunch Bronx as Kennedy had perfectly articulated, a hardworking home health aide named Maria Gutierrez watched the viral hearing on her cracked smartphone during a brief lunch break at her elderly patient's cramped apartment. Maria was 54 years old. She worked grueling hours to earn just $38,000 a year. She lived directly in the district AOC was elected to represent. She had enthusiastically voted for AOC in 2018, confidently in 2020, dutifully in 2022, and habitually in 2024. When the video reached Kennedy's brutal segment detailing the Puerto Rico expenditures, blowing $50,000 at luxury Caribbean resorts while simultaneously lecturing struggling families to sacrifice meat and dairy, Maria slowly placed her phone face down on the faded kitchen counter. She stared blankly at the counter. She looked down at the humble lunch she had packed from home, a simple container of rice, beans, and a single piece of chicken she had meal prepped on Sunday because cooking in massive bulk was the only way she survived financially. Nobody ever said that directly to her, Maria whispered to her exhausted coworker later that evening. Nobody ever asked her that specific question. She paused, her voice tinged with a complex mixture of betrayal and realization. And she couldn't even answer it. She sighed heavily. I honestly like her. She's undeniably smart. She fights the establishment. But $50,000 at a luxury resort? Miss Alexandria, I can't even afford a weekend trip to Puerto Rico. I can barely afford the subway fare to visit my sister in Queens. Maria didn't definitively declare that she would entirely stop voting for AOC. She didn't angrily announce she was converting to the Republican Party. Instead, she articulated something significantly quieter, yet in its own way, infinitely more dangerous for a politician's career. I honestly just want her to come here to this apartment. Not for a staged photo op, not for a viral Instagram live stream. Just come sit right here at my tiny kitchen table and logically explain to my face how spending $93 trillion of our money is going to help me afford my weekly groceries. She nodded to herself. That's all I want. That is the homework. Down in Shreveport, Louisiana, a passionate high school AP government teacher named Gerald Thibodeau showed the hearing clip to his packed classroom the following Monday morning. Gerald was the proud grandson of Beatrice Thibodeau. a legendary retired educator who had bravely taught at Caddo Parish's very first racially integrated elementary school. "Watch this incredibly closely," Gerald instructed his captivated students. "The entire 20 minutes. Do not look at your phones. Do not skip ahead. And when the video concludes, I want you to critically answer one singular question." The diverse class watched the footage in the highly specific, captive silence of cynical teenagers encountering something genuinely compelling that hijacked their attention against their will. When the hearing clip finally faded to black, Gerald posed his ultimate question. Senator Kennedy directly asked Representative Ocasio-Cortez to mathematically defend her massive $93 trillion legislative proposal using hard numbers, not emotional slogans. She completely failed. Why couldn't she do it? A bright student named Keisha confidently raised her hand. Because she never actually did the math. Gerald smiled warmly. The exact same patient, immensely satisfied, all-knowing smile his beloved grandmother Beatrice used to wear when a struggling student finally arrived at the exact profound conclusion she had been patiently waiting for. Precisely because she never bothered to do the math, Kesha, she brilliantly constructed the grand vision. She flawlessly designed the revolutionary brand. She crafted the viral Instagram posts. She beautifully posed for the elite magazine covers. But she never actually sat down at a desk with a cheap calculator and divided 93 trillion by 330 million. He slowly scanned the quiet, attentive classroom, making eye contact with the next generation of voters. That is the ultimate lesson here today, kids, and it isn't strictly about partisan politics, it is a fundamental lesson about life. Do your required homework, intimately know your numbers, because if you refuse to put in the work, eventually somebody exactly like Senator Kennedy will happily do the math for you in front of the entire world. And I promise you, you will not enjoy the experience. He paused, letting the gravity of the lesson settle into their young minds. My grandmother taught in this exact district for 31 years. She used to constantly tell me, "Child, you can talk a big game all day long, but if you cannot show your work on the chalkboard, the teacher will instantly know." Senator Kennedy acted as the teacher in that room, and Representative Ocasio-Cortez simply could not show her work. Kesha quickly raised her hand a second time. "Mr. T, is that hilarious shampoo bottle analogy a real thing? Did he actually say that before this hearing?" Gerald laughed deeply, a rich sound filling the classroom. "He has been relentlessly saying that for years, Kesha. For a long time, the political elite arrogantly thought it was merely a harmless, funny joke from a silly old man. It turns out it was always a highly calculated warning. If you have made it this far into the video, you have just witnessed exactly what inevitably happens when an individual who has spent 6 years functioning as the absolute loudest, most visible voice in the room finally collides with an individual who has spent 30 years functioning as the most meticulously prepared. Smash that like button if Senator Kennedy's masterclass made you want to instantly check whether your own elected representative has actually done the math on their promises. Subscribe to the channel for more incredible deep dives into moments where undeniable substance permanently defeats empty slogans, and simple calculators absolutely demolish curated Instagram feeds. Share this incredible story with every hardworking American who has ever been condescendingly lectured to skip meat by an elite politician who regularly dines at luxury tropical resorts. Drop a comment below and let the community know. What was your absolute favorite lesson from the hearing? Was it the catfish farm analogy, the devastating spouse tax trick exposure, the legendary shampoo bottle metaphor, the zero bills reality check, or the ultimate homework assignment? Let us know your thoughts. Make sure to turn on your notifications because that homework assignment is still officially past due. The House ethics findings are still permanently lingering on her official public record. The massive campaign finance irregularities remain deeply unanswered. And somewhere deep in the heart of Louisiana, a 73-year-old senator is likely enjoying a bowl of gumbo, quietly reviewing his yellow legal pad, and waiting with infinite, terrifying patience for the very next arrogant politician who foolishly mistakes his complete silence for stupidity. God bless our dedicated teachers who stubbornly taught us the vital importance of showing our work. God bless our invisible pension fund managers who fiercely protect the money that nobody thinks about until they desperately need it. God bless every exhausted home health aide who packs rice and beans for lunch because cooking in bulk is the only way to survive financially. And God bless every single American citizen who intuitively recognizes the massive, undeniable difference between a manufactured political brand and a proven, concrete record. She arrived armed with flashy slogans. He arrived armed with a simple calculator. She wields 36 million digital followers. He wields 30 years of undeniable, ironclad receipts. She arrogantly called him a joke. He calmly assigned her homework.